Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
I imagine we're all growing frustrated, and in my case, angry, about the continued lockdown of America by politicians who claim they are protecting us from the COVID-19 virus. But the more I research and study what's happening to our country, certain words come to mind, like deception, self-interested, agendas, power grabs, fraud, political crimes. But the one word I think best describes what is happening is this one, coup. So I've asked Dr. Angelo Codevilla to join me on the show today. He's written a powerful 21-page essay for the American mind entitled The COVID Coup and How to Unlock Ourselves. It's an exceptional explanation of the direct, persistent assault on freedom that's going on in America. He writes, panicked by fears manufactured by the ruling class, the American people assented to being put essentially under house arrest until further notice, effectively suspending the habits, preferences, and liberties that have defined our way of life. Dr. Codevilla is Professor Emeritus of International Relations at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University and a member of the working group on military history at Stanford's Hoover Institution. Among his 13 books are War, Ends and Means, Informing Statecraft, a linguistic analysis of Machiavelli's Prince, The Character of Nations, and the monograph, The Ruling Class versus the Country Class. A Google search for Angelo Codevilla yields some 2 million items. Angelo, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, there's so many things I want to dig into with you, but let's start with the ruling class, because the premise here is that this is not about the virus, this is about something else, and that something else is power, and it's power being exerted by what you've defined as the ruling class. Would you give me a quick summary of what you mean by that? I think I know, but.
Look, this is the United States of America. There's not supposed to be a ruling class. The founding document of this country, the Declaration of Independence, says all men are created equal. And that, of course, is an explicit denial of any person or any group's right to rule anybody else without their consent. But in fact, what has happened to us is something very familiar in history, very familiar to the great thinkers. Aristotle describes in Book 5 of the Politics the sort of standard process by which constitutional republics like ours come into the hands of a ruling class. What happens is that parts of the polity, the oligarchs, the officials, gradually gain more and more strength, become more and more self-interested, govern more and more in their own interest rather than the interest of the whole. And at a certain point, they drop the mask and simply explicitly seize the rest of power and say, you simply obey and we command, and that's all there is to it. There are a million pretexts on which they can do it. Over the centuries, this has happened in any number of ways. One of the usual ones is to claim that an emergency has arisen, something unusual, and that requires the seizure of power. History, again, is full of these things. Perhaps people are still mindful enough of history to know what happened in Germany in 1933. There was a fire in the Reichstag, and because of that, a mustachioed little bastard ended up taking over and wreaking havoc. Now here we have a
fire that was started by
the
little guy with the mustache. Yeah.
By the little guy with the mustache.
Yeah.
What we've got now is a pandemic which was not started by anybody here, but as Mr. Axelrod reminded us, never let a crisis go to waste. And they've made from their standpoint, very good use of it. They have taken power in ways that none of us would have imagined possible just a short while ago.
Well, there's really no emergency now, except maybe for them, the 2020 election.
Well, that is a gamble that they are taking, and we have yet to see how that gamble will turn out. But it is a gamble on their side. This will either consolidate their power, or it will wreck it. It might very well do just that, because there's nothing quite awakening a sleeping giant and filling him with terrible resolve, as Mr. Yamamoto said.
Well, I think that's beginning to happen. I think more and more people are growing suspicious.
Again, you don't know. This remains to be seen.
Is there any evidence that the COVID-19 provides extra risks to people's lives?
Oh no. Look. This is the very name COVID-19 tells us this is something that has happened before. You've had various 18 kinds of coronaviruses coming out of China in the past, and we have this one. Now it is a virus, and it's not a friendly, cuddly thing. It does some harm, but question is how much. And the ruling class has taken very good care to make sure that the American people, the people in the West, are not aware of exactly what that virus does and does not do.
And then we've locked everyone down, and the premise essentially is maybe not everyone's equally vulnerable, but certainly everybody needs to be equally responsible. So we've inflicted this on everyone, when in fact the virus is lethal, but it's lethal to people who are 75 and older who have comorbidity. And Italy, you corrected me. You very friendly corrected me on how to pronounce your last name before we got started. As an Italian, you're probably aware that Italy, 99.1% of the people who died averaged 80 years old, and they all had type 2 diabetes.
Type 2 there's some peculiarity in this virus with regard to diabetes. Again, we don't know why, but we do know that it is that. Now, the Germans did a study and came up with conclusions that are very similar, but they phrased it differently. They said, look, the people who have died are people who would have died, who almost certainly would have died anyway during that period, because every year, every day, people do die for a variety of reasons. And at the end of life, the human body is very weak and absorbs all kinds of viruses, all kinds of germs. I mean, at the end of life, everything kills you together. This is what happens. And again, the view of the German health authorities was that this really, in and of itself, was not a terrible problem. But now this is the view of the health authorities, and but the government chose to present it not as in as virulent a way as the U.S. government, but still in somewhat the same way. Let me explain why. Why the similarity between the reactions of most governments. I've got a phone. Sorry.
Is that your daughter-in-law?
I have no idea who that was.
They have these identified rings. I was trying to
look all over the Western world.
Yeah.
For the past dozen years, at least, ordinary people have been revolting against their rulers. It's what has happened here in the United States with the election of Donald Trump is by no means unknown caller. Is by no means unique. In Italy, the ruling parties have been clobbered in referenda and electorally. The same thing has happened in Germany. Angela Merkel, who is the reigning major statesman of Europe, has been roundly rejected by her voters. It's incredible.
I'm on the board of the American Conservative Union, and
let me finish. I'm sorry for being heavy.
I was going to amplify your point, though, which is runs the CPAC, and we hold CPAC in the United States once a year, but we've taken to hosting it around the world, and you find the same kind of people showing up in Japan as you do in the United States, who are revolting against what you'd call the ruling class, to the extent that some people show up at the rallies in Tokyo wearing MAGA hats.
Oh yes, well, of course. No, there is a fellow feeling, both on the part of the ruling classes and on the part of those who revolt against them. It's essentially the same phenomenon, because again, the governments of modern countries are very much alike, and so are the peoples very much alike, and so the phenomenon that we have here in the United States is akin to that which exists in other countries. So the ruling classes have had the very same interest in using this virus as an occasion, not to say excuse, to first of all change the subject. The subject of public discourse had been dissatisfaction with the ruling class. At least now the subject has changed to, the virus. And it has given the ruling classes the presumption of authority. It given them the chance to exercise the presumption of authority.
Are you familiar with what's happened in Melbourne? In Melbourne, Melbourne, Australia, Jeffrey Tucker of AEIR has written about Melbourne, and they're draconian. Their lockdown is infinitely more draconian than what we've seen here in the United States. And they have police now entering homes without warrants. You can't visit family or friends. There's a $200 fine for no mask. Only one person per day per household can leave the house, and that's even for weddings are illegal, and there are no gatherings of any size, and the army's on the street arresting people. And what happened was they thought as an island they were secure and they could keep the virus out. And you know a lot about this strategy. I guess the Venetians used it. You keep people out of your country. But once the virus comes in,
well, that's the point.
There's nothing you can do. I mean, exactly. it's going to have to spread.
Exactly. No, quarantine is something which is properly exercised on infected people. The idea of quarantining healthy people is reality upside down. Look, this is not a complex thought. This is not something you have to be an epidemiologist to understand. The purpose of quarantining is to keep infected people apart from others until the disease has or has not manifested itself, so that the disease does not enter a population. Once it has entered the population, it's Katie bar the door. It will go through the population. Angela Merkel, who had politically failed, is herself a scientist, and at least with regard to scientific matters, honest. And when the virus hit, her reaction was, that 70%
Yeah.
of Germans would eventually get it,
Mhm.
and that would be that. And that is the case here as well. Uh, that's the bad news. The good news is that this particular virus is unusually mild. This is not, for most people, this is a lot less than the flu. It's not just the flu; it's a lot less than the flu.
Well, you've got some data. You've got some data. You get some data to back that up. I think is in
Well,
your.
yeah, no. I mean, look. The Spanish government most recently published that 60% of all of the people who they have tested and have tested positive are asymptomatic, i.e., that they didn't know they had it. I mean, that is how mild the COVID-19 virus is for most people. 4 out of 5 who are infected, 4 out of 5 cases are asymptomatic cases. Now, that is, I began my essay by making the distinction between the COVID virus and the plague. And that is a distinction which the ruling class has tried to elide. But that is the basic distinction. If you have to, the beginning of wisdom about all of this, the truth about all of this is that no, this is not the plague.
And we knew that very early on because of the way it behaved in Wuhan. We knew what had happened with the Chinese, that it was absolutely not.
Repeat after me. This is not the plague. This is not the plague.
You're watching the Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Dr. Angelo Codevilla, and we're talking about the COVID-19, and it is not a plague, and we know that, and now we need to figure out how we can unlock our country. So we made a lot of mistakes. We've locked everything down. If you could wave a wand to say, okay, well, let's get rational. What should we do? I mean, we need to protect the vulnerable. We need to protect older people, but this idea of not sending children to schools is just crazy.
Not simply, we should not protect simply older people, but older sick people.
Okay.
Because again, the data that we have from countries that have actually gathered such data, and this country of ours has not, the data from Spain is that the mortality rate for infected people for healthy infected people over 90 is 10%. Now, we're talking about people over 90 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the very oldest people, but who have no underlying conditions. You know, ordinary healthy people over 90 years old, and who get the virus, only 10% die.
Isn't the fatality rate for people under 70 0.04%?
I'm not certain.
It's an infinitesimally low number.
Very, very low.
Yeah.
Again, all illnesses strike those who are already ill hardest. You know, I mean, this is a basic truth. If you are weakened by something, anything that hits you will make you even weaker. I mean, this is common sense. In this case, in the case of this virus, it takes a particular kinds of weakness to be really struck. So what Governor Cuomo did, of course, was the absolute opposite of common sense. He put COVID positive people in nursing homes, which are not simply full of old people. They're full of old, frail people who have to be subject to nursing care. These are simply the weakest of the weak. You know, he put this virus among the weakest of the weak. And of course they died like flies. What else would you expect?
Isn't that the reason why New York fatalities are the highest per capita in the country?
Yeah.
I mean, that would, if you wanted to put your finger on why it's so different in New York, that's a big reason. What was they had excess deaths of 20, 30,000 because of that?
again, nobody knows exactly what it is because, again, they've been very careful not to allow those figures to be gathered. But if you think about this, nursing homes are the places where the weakest of the weak are, where the most vulnerable of the vulnerable are, you see. Now, question, where are the least vulnerable people in the world? Schools.
Yeah.
That is the place where the least vulnerable people on the planet gather.
Well, the teachers' unions, though, have been using this to say, well, okay, the children may not get it, but they could spread it to us. And there's very little evidence that this virus spreads to
but then again,
older people.
If to give them their due, everyone has his own level of fear.
Yeah.
I have a neighbor who is totally healthy and who is paranoid about the virus. And well, I say to her, I say, well, it's a free country. If you want to indulge that fear, if it makes you feel fuzzy and warm to indulge that fear, go ahead.
But I think your point is this fear has been engineered, though.
Anybody else?
But I think your point, though, is that this fear has been engineered, and it's been engineered by people who benefit from it. And you've got a list of entities and organizations that have benefited from the fact that we're locked down.
Well, that's right.
I mean, government's benefited. Nobody's been laid off. There hasn't been a single pay cut.
The teachers' unions, of course, have made this. I mean, if you want a testimonial to the brass, to brass faces and other parts of the body, here you have the unions saying, "Hey, look, pay us what we have always wanted, or we won't."
Right.
Or we won't. To which the rational answer is, "Okay, this is a free country. You don't want to work. You don't have to work. You're fired."
But one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this with you, though, is that, as you said at the outset, this may be a political blunder by people who think this is going to be helpful in November, and that this could backfire. And what we're identifying here is we've got government that's benefiting, teachers unions that are benefiting, Amazon. I mean, Jeff Bezos is a big winner.
Bezos, the richest of all.
And he's the news media, social media companies, Twitter, Facebook, Google.
That's right. Guess who put all these people together, and what collective name would you apply to them? Oh, the ruling class.
Could you coin that term and maybe write it?
Well, no, I mean, I didn't.
No, I'm
coined it, believe me.
I'm appreciating your.
What I did is I applied it to the United States of America, and it had not been applied to the United States of America before because we really didn't have one. We had you had rich people, you had more influential people, less influential people, but the influential people in America, and this is a very important point with regard to the ruling class, were diverse. You had different ways of being prominent, different ways of being powerful. Now it's different. Now there really is only one way of being prominent and of being powerful and of being rich, and that is being connected to government, and specifically the Democratic Party. Now it's possible to be well off and powerful and not a Democrat and not being connected with government. But take, for example, the epitome of this, a man by the name of Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas sits on top of the legal hierarchy, member of the Supreme Court. He's a well-off man, et cetera, et cetera. Is he part of the ruling class? Absolutely not. He has none of the privileges of the ruling class, you see. People like ruling class. I'm sure that Bill Walton is not a poor fellow, but Bill Walton is not a member of the ruling class. Why? Because members of the ruling class do not consider Bill Walton a member of the ruling class, just as they don't consider Clarence Thomas a member of the ruling class.
Yes, well, they consider the basketball player a member of the ruling class, but
well, that's right.
So that's the point. You got sports figures, and the whole NBA and NFL is now fallen on its knee to join
sports figures, but even bad ones like Colin Kaepernick, who's a lousy quarterback.
But we're digging into something here that you've labeled as intersectionality, right? People have labeled it, which there's a solidarity among groups.
That's not my label. Intersectionality is a house term of the radical left.
So what that means is you make common cause with people. You've got the global warming people, abortion, open borders, media censorship on speech, that kind of thing. And there seems to be an incredible alignment between people who thinks this virus is lethal and the people who hold those views.
Right.
And you're not gonna punch through because they're aligned to say this is the most lethal thing ever.
Right. Now, the point, the fact that we pointed out here, the question to ask is, why are they all aligned? On what are they aligned? And the whole point of intersectionality is this. You may hate the United States of government and Western civilization because it is a barrier to abortion. You may hate the United States because it is racist. You may hate the United States of America and Western civilization because it is patriarchal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are all different. We all have, we good people have different concerns, but the reasons for our concerns are identical. Namely, we all hate the United States of America. We all hate Western civilization. It is this hatred for this one thing that unites us. That is the meaning of intersectionality, you see. Sharing only common hatred. And because we share the common hatred, and now this is the final point, because we share this common hatred, we all share each other's hatred. We who hate America for reason A, now also hate it for reason B, C, D, E, and F.
Well, speaking of intersectionality, we had the virus erupt, and then very quickly thereafter, we had the Black Lives Matter erupt, and rioting and looting and tearing down places like Portland. Those two are interconnected.
Well, yes, by intersectionality.
Yeah.
They are connected by common hatred of the United States of America and civilization. Look, what is the commonality between the COVID virus and and racial resentment and tearing down the statue of Julius Caesar? Julius Caesar, yeah.
I missed that one. They tore down Julius Caesar as well.
Julius Caesar. What's the commonality there? Well, the commonality is Western civilization. See, not that Julius Caesar was a great champion of it, but he was one of the major figures thereof. Whether you like Julius Caesar or not, you know, he was big stuff in this civilization, one way or another.
So where have the Republicans been in this? I think they've been absent without leave, but
well, the heads have been up their rears. Yes. And that points us to a political fact, which is key to the existence of the ruling class, namely that in the United States of America, there is no bona fide opposition to the ruling class. And the reason for that lack of opposition is the nature of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is the junior member of the ruling class, which lives electorally by pretending to be an opposition party. And at best, it has its foot in both camps. But it is that equivocation which makes all of this possible.
You make a go ahead.
You and I have just been saying that the left, the revolutionaries are taking a big gamble in all of this. Yes, they are. But what would failure in that game, what would loss consist of? Well, it would consist of the Republican Party getting lots of votes that it wouldn't have gotten otherwise. The Republican Party? The Republican Party that does what? The Republican Party that generally backs up the ruling class, you see. So in a way, the
downside is not that great.
downside is not that great. Which is why, excuse me for staying on grubby politics a little longer, which is why the great struggle that took place in 2016 took place in the Republican primaries, not so much in the general election. The question was, would there be anyone coming out of the Republican primaries who was against the ruling class? And what we got was an ambiguous result, because Donald Trump is only primarily verbally, an opponent of the ruling class.
Well, you're watching the Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Dr. Angelo Codevilla, and we're talking about how the COVID-19 is really about politics and the partisanship and intersectionality and people making common cause against the ordinary Americans. You pointed out in the book something I quite agree with, or in your piece. I think Donald Trump made a strategic blunder early on to not say to people, look, this is bunk. This disease is not lethal. It's not a plague. It's not going to kill a lot of people. There's no evidence coming out of the numbers in China that would suggest that. Relax, everybody. We're going to get through this, and we're not going to lock down. And yet on March 19th, when he announced that we're locking the country down, that pretty much gave the playing field to the people that where they still have it.
He gave credit where credit was not due, and the people to whom he gave credit grabbed it and began beating him over the head with it. If Donald Trump is thrown out of office, I must say that he deserves it fully, because he made a mistake that no individual, never mind a political man, should ever make.
Well, he made a claim early on, well, I saved 3 million lives by locking everything down, which was just absolutely wrong.
Which again, he tried.
And now he's still living with that.
He tried to build himself up, but was foolish in doing it. But as we denigrate Donald Trump, let us not forget.
I'm not denigrating. I just made. I think he made a blunder, though. We all do, but I think he has a hard time walking that one back.
Nothing but the truth. Look, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I'll vote for him again. But the mistakes he made are the mistakes that he made, and not only is he suffering from them, the rest of the country is suffering from them. The things that have been done to this country by the lockdowns are monstrous.
But it's falling so much disproportionately on the ordinary Americans. It's stunning. Because, if you look at the beneficiaries, why is the stock market up 50%? Well, the stock market's made up of names like Adidas, Amazon, American Express, all the big companies, and all the tech companies. And so if you're living on a portfolio or you're among the wealthy, you're not hurt by this.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, the more money you've got, the better off, the proportionately better off you are. But think of the economic effects. They really are very remarkable. One would not have thought it possible, for example, and economists are going to have a hard time explaining how it is that by reducing the supply of things, because the supply of things has been reduced by people no longer being employed producing, the supplies of food and everything else have been reduced. By reducing the supply of things, prices have been driven up, but in a way that has required the things that are produced, some of the things that are produced, to be thrown away. especially in agricultural goods. Like I run a farm, and I see all over farm country vegetables being plowed under, things being thrown away, animals being slaughtered and buried, and yet prices rising. What monstrosity is this? Also, I have more contact with with hospitals than I would like, because I am a heart transplant patient, and so I noticed that my own appointments, my own monitoring of my condition, has been drastically reduced, and millions of others have had their tests and procedures delayed, and a lot of people are suffering and dying because of manufactured shortages in healthcare.
I did a show with Jim Agresti, who runs Just Facts, and he's a hardcore statistical analyst, and he estimates that the deaths caused by the lockdown could be some 90 times that of the actual lives saved.
Right. Well, by the way, there is no evidence whatsoever that the lockdown saved any lives whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, and so people aren't going to the dentist. They're not taking tests. They're not being diagnosed. They're not taking treatments.
Remember the meaning of the word quarantine, okay?
Yeah.
Quarantine is a period of isolation imposed on the sick and potentially sick, not on the healthy. This is simply a fact. This is fundamental. And yet you have the likes of Anthony Fauci saying, no, quarantine the healthy. This is not science. And Donald Trump does not have the courage to say this man is a fraud. Now, he knows Donald Trump is not dumb. He knows that this man is a fraud. He has realized for a long time that he made a mistake, but he has been frozen by fear from saying.
Who is Dr. Anthony Fauci? I mean, I know from TV, and how did he come to such prominence, and why do we care what he thinks and says so much?
Let me tell you that. Let me suggest that you use two different tenses when you ask that question. Who was Anthony Fauci? Anthony Fauci was a renowned epidemiologist. He did some work 30 years ago, which made him justly famous in his field. Who is Anthony Fauci? That's something different. He is a bureaucrat, and a leftist bureaucrat to boot, a partisan leftist bureaucrat, an activist partisan leftist bureaucrat. Who is Anthony Fauci also? He is also a profiteer of the drug industry. So when you say who is Anthony Fauci, well, you must use tenses and ask in regard to what.
Was he behind the attack on hydroxychloroquine? I mean, is that because he had another cure? I mean, we have a cure at hand. It seems to work quite well, and I think you point out that Michigan's Henry Ford Health System's done a lot of work that shows that it's effective.
Not only that, but you have a doctor actually. One thing that Dr. Fauci is not, he is not a practicing doctor. I don't believe that this man has seen a patient in 30 years. But you do have many practicing doctors who have treated patients successfully with hydroxychloroquine. Now, the left, when the left speaks of abortion, speaks of the sanctity of the relationship between patient and doctor. Well, what about this sanctity now? This sanctity does not allow the use of hydroxychloroquine, which has been used safely for 60 years.
Yeah. Well, Jenny Beth Martin had a group of doctors in front of the Capitol.
Zero sincerity. This whole business with hydroxychloroquine shows zero sincerity. Fauci, by the way, showed his lack of sincerity when one day he was asked early on. This is back in April. Dr. Fauci, some people say that hydroxychloroquine is an effective drug. If you became infected with the COVID virus, would you take hydroxychloroquine? And since, his actually becoming infected was a real possibility, he hesitated, essentially saying, we don't ask that question. But the interviewer insisted. And Fauci said, well, yes, I would take it. But only in a hospital setting and as part of a clinical trial.
Well, one of the words I used to open the show was the word crime. It seems to me that if you know something's effective and you discredit it, and in fact you collude with I don't know if collusion's the right word, but you get the social media companies to pull videos off of YouTube or Facebook or wherever they are where you've got practicing doctors claiming that this works. And there have been hundreds, if not thousands of them that have come out and said that. And yet that's been blacklisted. That's radio silence. You're not allowed to say that.
We do have in this country, for good or ill, probably for ill, a very, very active civil tort bar. I would imagine it might be very interesting if someone who had suffered because hydroxychloroquine was denied him or her sued a whole bunch of people for, in fact, making it difficult to get that drug, or someone's husband or wife had died. Said, look, this drug was denied my husband, my wife, and he died. And I'm now suing these bastards for X millions of dollars.
My guess is that's going to happen. Now we're winding things up. We've got just a few minutes left. You have a way to get at the truth from this that involves holding hearings. And you point out that Kefauver held hearings about the labor unions and the mafia, and then Sam Ervin did Watergate. And there's a whole lot of good when a senator pulls somebody in front and puts their hand on the Bible and says, you got to tell the truth.
Listen, I worked for 8 years on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I had to deal with some of the worst liars in the world, namely the CIA. But boy, oh boy, you get these people in a hearing, whether it's, especially if it's public, and you get them to put that hand on the Bible, and all they see when they do that is the number 5. That's the number of years you get for perjury. And you ask them a hard question, and you ask it again and again.
So who would hold these hearings, and who would they call to testify?
Well,
I think you mentioned Rand Paul and Ted Cruz have got committees.
You would bring in Fauci and and those who have made decisions in this regard, claiming the authority of science, claiming that they knew something. And you would ask them, how do you know that? Do you really know? Did you act on a reasonable basis, or did you not? Or was there no reason? And if the interviewers are sharp, they can punch through claims of reasonableness really rather quickly. So you didn't know, or you didn't? Did you take into account this fact? Well, I didn't know the fact. Yes, you did know that fact. In other words, hearings can hold people responsible. That's one advantage. The other advantage is that these hearings can showcase the truth. Number one, the COVID was not a plague. It never was a plague. There never was any reason to believe it was a plague. Number two, what did you know? Did you know that? Well, yes, you did know it. Number three, even though A, it wasn't a plague, and B, you knew it, why did you do A, B, and C? And so on and so forth. That is what hearings would do.
Well, we'll get to the senators and talk to them about that, because that's a great line of action. People are looking for leadership to help us out of this, and instead of freeing people up, things seem to be more draconian, especially if you live in the Maryland area, DC area, with what's happening in August of 2020. Dr. Codevilla, thank you for joining me. This has been fascinating, and we've covered just a bit of what we can get into, so I hope you'll come back. I recommend everybody to go to the American Mind website and pull up his essay on the COVID coup. There's a lot of wisdom in it, and our Dr. Codevilla is a very wise man, and I hope you learn a lot from it, and I hope we can continue our conversation sometime soon.
You're most welcome.
Oh, and hold on a second. My wife is in the other side of the set.
On the ruling class versus the country class.
Oh yeah, and we'd also have you read The Ruling Class versus the Country Class, which really gets at the roots of how this division came about and why it matters today.
How about the rest of my books? Huh?
How about the rest of his books? Well, I think I want to read your one on Machiavelli's Prince. That sounded interesting. So we'll read all your books. So anyway, thank you, and I'll see you again soon. All right, take care. Great. Bye. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guest on our Interesting People page. And send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.